The wine in Clara's glass was as bitter as the praise being heaped upon the artist across the room. She stood alone, a ghost in a black dress, pressed against a stark white wall while the city's art scene swirled around her in a cacophony of false laughter and expensive perfume. Each compliment directed at Marcus Thorne, a man whose art was as manufactured as his smile, felt like a tiny, sharp stone thrown directly at her. His canvases were loud, abstract explosions of color that said nothing, yet everyone here pretended they were profound. Her own work, quiet portraits that tried to capture the geography of a human soul, sat collecting dust in her studio. A tremor of humiliation ran through her. She shouldn't have come. Her agent had insisted, calling it networking, but it felt more like self-flagellation. She watched Mr. Davies, the gallery owner with a predatory gleam in his eyes, place a paternal hand on Marcus's shoulder. Davies had looked at her portfolio once, his lip curled in a dismissive sneer. "Too sentimental, my dear," he'd said, the "my dear" dripping with condescension. "People want a statement, not a feeling." He had effectively blacklisted her from every significant gallery in the city with that one pronouncement. The gallery's large plate-glass windows suddenly rattled, and a collective gasp went through the crowd. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple-gray. Rain began to lash against the glass, driven by a wind that howled like a wounded animal. The storm had arrived with a theatrical fury that matched the tempest in her own chest. People began to make their hurried goodbyes, pulling out phones to call for cars, their chatter shifting from art to the inconvenience of the weather. Clara finished her wine in one gulp, the bitterness a familiar companion. It was time to go, to retreat back to the quiet solitude of her apartment. She slipped through the thinning crowd, invisible, and pushed open the heavy glass door. The wind tore it from her grasp, slamming it against the wall as a sheet of icy rain hit her with physical force. She gasped, pulling her thin coat tighter around her as she fumbled in her purse for her car keys. Her ancient sedan was parked 3 blocks away, a miserable walk in this deluge. When she finally reached it, soaked to the bone and shivering, the key turned in the ignition with a sickening, defeated click. Nothing. She tried again. Click. A pathetic whimper. The engine was dead. Of course, it was. It was just another failure in a long, unbroken chain of them. She rested her forehead against the cold steering wheel, the dam of her composure finally breaking. A tear traced a path through the raindrops on her cheek. Alone, stranded, a failure. The words circled in her head, a miserable mantra. She reached for her phone to call a taxi, her fingers numb with cold. The screen was black. Dead. A strangled, humorless laugh escaped her lips. The universe wasn't just indifferent, it was actively malicious. Defeated, she peered through the rain-streaked windshield. The street was mostly dark, but a block away, a warm, steady light glowed from the ground floor of a brick building. It was a beacon in the churning darkness. A medical clinic, the sign read. Maybe someone was there. Maybe they had a phone she could use. With no other option, she pulled her coat over her head and plunged back into the storm. The clinic door was locked, but a light was on in an office at the back. Clara pounded on the glass, her fist aching with the cold. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please?" Her voice was thin against the roar of the wind. For a moment, she thought no one had heard her. Then, a figure appeared, moving from the back office toward the front. The door clicked open, and a woman stood there, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. She was tall and wore dark blue scrubs that seemed to accentuate her calm, capable presence. Her hair was styled in intricate braids, and her dark eyes, warm and intelligent, took in Clara's drenched and pathetic state. "Can I help you?" Her voice was low and steady, a soothing melody under the storm's percussive assault. "I'm so sorry to bother you," Clara stammered, teeth chattering. "My car broke down. My phone is dead. I saw the light. I was hoping I could use your phone to call a cab. Before the woman could answer, a small head peeked around her legs. A little girl, no older than 6, with bright, curious eyes and a head full of beautiful, beaded braids that matched her mother's, stared up at Clara. "Mama, she's a rain lady," the girl said with the solemn finality of childhood. "She's very wet." The woman's serious expression softened into a gentle smile as she looked down at her daughter. "Yes, she is, Maya. Go back and finish your drawing." She looked back at Clara. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Reed. Please, come in. You can't stay out in this." Evelyn led her through the sterile waiting room into a cozy, cluttered office. A half-finished drawing of a purple cat sat on the floor next to a worn-out teddy bear. The scent of sandalwood and antiseptic hung in the air, a strangely comforting combination. "The storm is getting worse," Evelyn said, gesturing to a chair. "The news is saying the roads are starting to flood. I don't think a cab will make it out here for a while." Clara's heart sank. Oh, it was the only sound she could manage. The last of her energy seemed to drain away, leaving her hollow. Maya toddled over and tugged on Clara's wet sleeve. "You're sad," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "My mama can fix it. She's a doctor." Evelyn chuckled softly, a warm, rich sound. "I'm not sure I can fix a dead car, sweetie. But we can't let her go back out there." She looked at Clara, her gaze direct and kind. "You can stay here. The couch isn't much, but it's dry and warm. The storm should pass by morning." Clara was taken aback by the sheer generosity of the offer. "I couldn't possibly impose." "It's not an imposition," Evelyn said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It's dangerous out there. I have to finish up some paperwork anyway, and Maya and I were just camping out. You're welcome to join our little fort." She gestured to a pile of blankets and pillows in the corner. Clara felt a wave of gratitude so profound it almost brought her to tears again. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Really? Thank you." "Don't mention it," Evelyn said, her smile reaching her eyes. She went to the main clinic door. Clara heard the distinct sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. A flicker of unease went through her, a woman alone, trapped with a stranger. But when Evelyn turned back, her expression was one of professional reassurance. "Just locking up for the night. Standard procedure when I'm here late. Now, let me find you a dry blanket and a towel." The lock wasn't a threat, it was a promise of safety. For the first time all night, Clara felt a small, fragile seed of warmth begin to grow in her chest. Evelyn returned with a thick, soft blanket and a towel. "The bathroom is just down the hall. I think I have a spare set of scrubs you can change into. They won't be stylish, but they'll be dry." Clara accepted the items, her fingers brushing against Evelyn's. A tiny spark of electricity, unexpected and startling, passed between them. She quickly pulled her hand back, flustered. "Thank you," she said again, feeling clumsy and inadequate. She changed in the small, clean bathroom, the stiff fabric of the scrubs a strange comfort against her skin. When she returned, Evelyn had made tea, and the fragrant steam rose from 2 mugs on her desk. "I hope you like chamomile," Evelyn said, handing her a mug. Their hands touched again, and this time, Clara didn't pull away so quickly. She looked into Evelyn's eyes and saw not pity, but a quiet understanding. It was a look she hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. "I love it," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. She sat on the small couch, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders and cradling the warm mug in her hands. Maya had fallen asleep in her pillow fort, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The storm raged outside, but in this small, warm office, a profound sense of peace had settled over Clara. For the first time that night, she felt safe. They talked for hours. The conversation was easy, flowing from the storm to their work, to the city they both lived in but experienced so differently. Clara found herself telling Evelyn about her photography, about the passion that had once driven her and the cynicism that had slowly extinguished it. She even told her about Mr. Davies and the humiliating encounter at the gallery. She hadn't meant to unload her failures onto a complete stranger, but Evelyn was an incredible listener, her attentive silence making Clara feel heard and validated. "He sounds like an insecure little man who is threatened by real talent," Evelyn said with a conviction that made Clara's breath catch. "Your work doesn't need his approval to have value. Sentimental just means it has a heart. The world needs more of that, not less." Her words were a balm on a wound Clara hadn't even realized was still so raw. "You haven't even seen my work," Clara protested weakly. "I don't need to," Evelyn replied, her gaze unwavering. "I can hear it in your voice when you talk about it. You're not the problem." People like him are this simple affirmation of her worth, offered so freely by a woman she had just met, was more powerful than any gallery review. In return, Evelyn spoke of her own life, of the challenges of being a single mother and a dedicated physician. She spoke of her late wife, Alicia, with a mixture of profound love and lingering sorrow. She described their life together, the family they had built, and the devastating void Alicia's sudden illness had left behind. "Maya saved me," Evelyn confessed, her voice soft in the quiet room. "Waking up to her every day, it gave me a reason to keep going when all I wanted to do was disappear." It was an exchange of vulnerabilities, a quiet, unburdening of souls in the dead of night, cocooned from the world by the storm. Clara saw the strength in Evelyn's composure, but she also saw the deep well of loneliness she kept hidden. It was a loneliness Clara recognized because it mirrored her own. By the time the rain began to soften into a gentle patter against the windows, a fragile, unspoken connection had been woven between them. The next morning, Clara left a thank you note on Evelyn's desk, along with her phone number, scribbled on the back of a prescription pad slip. A week later, she worked up the courage to drop off a small, framed photograph at the clinic, a shot she had taken of the city skyline just as the sun broke through the clouds after the storm. It was a picture of hope. 2 days later, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The photo is beautiful. It's on my desk. You captured the light perfectly." Clara's heart did a little flip. She texted back, and soon they were planning to meet for coffee. Their first real date was at a small cafe nestled on a quiet side street. Away from the sterile environment of the clinic and the drama of the storm, Clara felt a nervous flutter. But the moment Evelyn walked in, her smile warm and genuine, the anxiety melted away. The conversation was just as easy as it had been that night, filled with laughter and a growing sense of familiarity. They discovered a shared love for old movies and a mutual dislike for cilantro. As autumn bled into the crisp chill of winter, their coffee dates turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks in the park, with Maya running ahead, her laughter echoing in the cold air. Clara started bringing her camera with her again. At first, she was hesitant, but Evelyn and Maya were such natural subjects. She captured the way the winter light caught in Evelyn's braids, the fierce concentration on Maya's face as she built a snowman, the quiet, loving glances that passed between mother and daughter. Her photography began to change. The melancholy that had haunted her previous work was replaced by a warmth and intimacy she hadn't realized was missing. She was no longer just an observer of life, she was a participant in it. She was falling in love, not just with Evelyn, but with the small, beautiful family they were becoming. One snowy evening in December, they were at Evelyn's house, decorating the Christmas tree. Maya was meticulously placing tinsel on the lowest branches, humming an out-of-tune version of Jingle Bells. The house smelled of pine needles and cinnamon. After they tucked a very excited Maya into bed, Clara and Evelyn sat on the couch, the only light coming from the twinkling fairy lights on the tree. "She's really taken with you, you know," Evelyn said softly, her shoulder brushing against Clara's. "The feeling is mutual," Clara admitted, her heart thumping in her chest. "Both of them." Evelyn turned to face her, her expression soft and searching. Clara. She began, but didn't seem to know how to finish. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with months of shared glances and lingering touches. Clara knew this was the moment. She leaned in, her movement slow, giving Evelyn every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, Evelyn met her halfway, her lips soft and hesitant against Clara's. The kiss was gentle at first, a question. Then, as Clara responded, deepening the kiss, it became an answer. It tasted of chamomile tea and hope and the promise of a new beginning. When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing in the same space. I think I'm falling in love with you, Clara, Evelyn whispered into the quiet. I think I've been in love with you since you called me a rain lady, Clara whispered back, a joyful tear escaping her eye. Their newfound happiness felt fragile and precious, a delicate bubble they wanted to protect from the outside world. They decided to keep their relationship quiet for a while, to give it time to solidify before facing the potential judgment of colleagues or the prying eyes of the art community. But the world has a way of intruding. A few weeks later, they were having lunch at a downtown bistro when Clara saw him. Mr. Davies. He was holding court at a nearby table, his booming voice grating on her ears. She tried to shrink into her seat, hoping he wouldn't notice her. But it was too late. His eyes scanned the room and locked onto hers. A cruel smirk spread across his face as his gaze shifted from Clara to Evelyn and back again. He sauntered over to their table, his presence casting a pall over their meal. Well, well. Clara. I see you've found yourself a patron, he said, his tone oozing with insinuation. He looked Evelyn up and down with a dismissive air. I'm on the board at University Hospital. I don't believe we've met, Doctor. Dr. Reed, Evelyn said, her voice steady and cold, though Clara could feel the tension radiating from her. Ah, yes. Reed, Davies mused. I'd be careful about the company you keep, Doctor. Reputations are so fragile. Especially when one associates with struggling artists of a certain persuasion. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. His homophobic jab hung in the air between them, ugly and toxic. He gave them another contemptuous smile and walked away. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The joy of the last few weeks evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. I'm so sorry, Ev, she murmured, her appetite gone. I shouldn't have. This is not your fault, Evelyn said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Her grip was firm, but Clara could see the worry in her eyes. He's a loathsome man. But he is influential. That night, they had a difficult conversation. Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, was worried. Her position at the hospital, her research grants, Maya's stability, it was all tied to her professional reputation. She suggested they be more discreet, just until Davies's attention moved elsewhere. Clara understood, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. It was a retreat back into the shadows, a confirmation of her deepest fear, that she was a liability, that her presence in someone's life could only bring them down. The easy intimacy they had built was suddenly strained by the weight of secrecy. They met at each other's homes, avoided public places, and the spontaneity that had been so joyful was replaced by careful planning and a constant, low-level anxiety. The breaking point came a month later. The hospital was hosting its annual charity gala, a major event for the city's elite. Evelyn was required to attend, and she invited Clara as her guest, determined not to let Davies intimidate them into hiding forever. They walked into the opulent ballroom hand in hand, a silent declaration. Davies was there, of course, schmoozing with the hospital's biggest donors. When he saw them, his face tightened into a mask of pure malice. Later in the evening, as Clara stood near a display of auction items, he cornered her. Still clinging to the good doctor, I see, he hissed, his voice low. You're a parasite, you know that? You'll drag her down with you. Leave me alone, Clara said, her voice trembling but firm. Or what? He sneered. You'll paint a sad little picture of me? Just then, Evelyn appeared at her side, her arm slipping protectively around Clara's waist. Is there a problem here, Mr. Davies? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. Davies turned his sneer on Evelyn. Just having a chat with your friend. I was just telling her how important appearances are. Especially for someone in your position, Doctor. A single mother, after all. One has to be so careful about the influences one brings into a child's life. The veiled threat against Maya was the final straw. Clara saw a flash of pure fury in Evelyn's eyes, followed by a flicker of fear. And in that moment, Clara knew she couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let this man poison the most beautiful thing in her life. But before she could speak, Evelyn straightened her shoulders, her spine turning to steel. She pulled Clara closer, turning to face Davies directly, her voice ringing out with clarity and conviction, drawing the attention of those standing nearby. Let me be perfectly clear, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the polite chatter of the gala. Her name is Clara. She is the most talented and resilient person I have ever met. And she is not my friend. She is my partner. The woman I love. A hush fell over their corner of the room. Davies's face went from smug to purple with rage. He opened his mouth to retort, but was cut off. Well said, Dr. Reed. The voice belonged to Eleanor Vance, the elderly and formidable chairwoman of the hospital board. She had been standing nearby and had heard everything. She fixed Davies with an icy glare. Your conduct, Mr. Davies, is unbecoming of a board member. In fact, it's unbecoming of a decent human being. We will be discussing your position at our next meeting. Davies sputtered, speechless for the first time in his life, as Eleanor gave Evelyn and Clara a warm, supportive smile before turning and walking away. The spell was broken. People started talking again, but the tone had shifted. Several of Evelyn's colleagues came over to offer quiet words of support. The fear that had held them captive had been shattered by one brave, public act of love. Standing there, holding Evelyn's hand, Clara felt a sense of pride and relief so overwhelming it made her dizzy. They had faced the monster, and they had won. The following months were a whirlwind of change. Davies was quietly removed from the hospital board. Freed from the burden of secrecy, Clara and Evelyn's relationship blossomed. They were a constant presence in each other's lives, building a new reality day by day. And Clara's art flourished. Inspired by Evelyn's courage and Maya's uninhibited joy, she created a new series of portraits, vibrant and full of life, capturing the quiet moments of love and connection that defined her new family. She submitted the series to a small, independent gallery, half expecting another rejection. Instead, they offered her a solo exhibition. The opening night was 6 months after the gala. The gallery was packed, the atmosphere buzzing with excitement. Clara walked through the rooms, looking at her own work as if for the first time. On the walls were images of Evelyn, reading a story to Maya, of Maya, her face smeared with chocolate, laughing, of their hands, intertwined on a park bench. It was a visual diary of their love. She found Evelyn and Maya standing in front of the largest piece in the show, a portrait of the three of them, taken with a self-timer, sitting on the couch in Evelyn's living room, tangled together in a mess of blankets, their faces alight with laughter. It was the picture of home. It's my favorite, Evelyn said softly, her eyes shining with tears. Mine too, Clara whispered. Evelyn took a deep breath and turned to face her. The crowd seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of light. Clara, she began, her voice thick with emotion. On the worst night of my life, after I lost Alicia, I thought I would never feel whole again. I thought my heart was closed for business forever. And then, one stormy night, a rain lady showed up at my door, drenched and sad, and somehow, she brought the sun back into my life. Into our lives. She gently took Clara's hands in hers. You taught me how to hope again. You showed Maya and me what it feels like to be a whole family. My life began again with you then. To Clara's utter shock, Evelyn dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the crowded gallery. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Maya, who had clearly been in on the plan, ran forward, holding a small, velvet box. She opened it to reveal a simple, elegant silver ring. Clara, Evelyn said, her gaze locked on hers, her eyes full of a love so profound it took Clara's breath away. I choose us. Every day, for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, and will you let us officially be your family? Tears were streaming down Clara's face, but she was smiling, a wide, brilliant smile that felt like it could light up the entire city. The crowd of friends and allies, the people who had supported them, were watching, their faces beaming. She saw Eleanor Vance in the back, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. She looked from Evelyn's hopeful face to Maya's excited one. This was it. This was everything she had ever wanted but had been too afraid to believe she could have. Yes, she breathed, the word a prayer and a promise. Yes. Of course, yes. Evelyn slid the ring onto her finger as the gallery erupted in applause. She pulled Clara down for a kiss that sealed their future, a public and joyful declaration of their commitment. 1 year later, on a bright Sunday morning, the smell of pancakes and coffee filled their new home. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the happy chaos within. Clara stood at the stove, flipping a pancake, while Evelyn poured maple syrup into a small bowl for Maya, who sat at the table, diligently coloring a picture of their family, 3 smiling figures holding hands under a giant, rainbow-colored sun. The walls of their home were covered in photographs. Not just Clara's professional work, but candid snapshots of their life together, their wedding day, Maya's first day of school, holidays, birthdays, quiet moments. It was a tapestry of their love story. Clara paused, pancake turner in hand, and just watched them. She thought back to that night, standing drenched and alone in the storm, feeling like the world had ended. It was strange to think that the worst, most humiliating moment of her life had been the beginning of everything that truly mattered. It had led her here, to this sun-drenched kitchen, to this love, to this family. She had been a ghost in a gallery, an artist who had forgotten how to feel. Now, she was a wife, a mother, a woman so full of love and joy she felt like she might burst. Evelyn looked up and caught her eye, her smile soft and knowing, as if she could hear Clara's thoughts. She crossed the kitchen and wrapped her arms around Clara from behind, resting her chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she murmured, her lips brushing against Clara's ear. "Just that I'm glad it rained that night," Clara said, leaning back into the embrace, feeling the solid, comforting weight of her wife. Maya looked up from her drawing, a smudge of purple crayon on her nose. "Me too," she said with absolute certainty. "Because then the rain lady came. And now she's my mama." Clara turned her head and kissed Evelyn, a slow, sweet kiss that tasted of syrup and forever. The final image was not one of isolation, but of belonging, a perfect portrait of a family, finally home.